All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the MAPS presentation for Friday, November 13th in 2020. I wanted to welcome everyone who is here, everyone who has helped support us in our remote mode of MAPS, that we will be continuing our remote MAPS presentation for the spring semester. This is our last presentation for the fall, and I want to thank everyone for all the support that you've shown us in this transition. And speaking of support, I wanted to direct your attention to a little bit lower down. If you scroll down on this YouTube page, we are still open for the MJC Giving Day. As of earlier today, the MAPS fund had gotten $1,500 out of the $5,000 goal. They still have the Giving Day going on for another couple of weeks till the beginning of December. Also, the Great Valley Museum and the rotating exhibits is another possible fund on Giving Day. So you can scroll down on the YouTube page and there are some links there. And thank you in advance for anything you might be able to give us, like $5 or $10, and everything helps us to keep bringing these talks to you. Also, I wanted to let you know that the Great Valley Museum is going to be open tomorrow, Saturday, from 9 to 3. The link to their website is also down below on the YouTube channel. And you need to make an appointment. They have 1 hour and 45-minute time slots, and then they have 15 minutes of cleaning before they open up the next time slot. So if you are interested in visiting the Great Valley Museum tomorrow, Saturday, they will be open. And also, even though this is our last MAPS talk for the semester, we still do have 2 science colloquium being offered at MJC this coming Wednesday, November 18th. There is a representative from Aemetis Biogas talking about California cow power. And then a couple weeks later, December 2nd, there's a NASA ambassador, Tom Crane, talking about our sun. So if you would like to watch some more science talks, you can check that out on the Science Colloquium on those Wednesdays coming up. And also in January, so in the spring, the MAPS will continue the 3rd Friday of each month. And our first one coming up, January 22nd, will be Jeff Marocha from Lawrence Livermore National Labs. He's an atmospheric scientist, and he'll be talking to us about global climate change and local wildfires and all kinds of interesting topics that day. So keep your eyes open and save the date, and we hope to see you soon. And I want to turn it over to Susan Kerr to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Kerr. I teach anthropology at Modesto Junior College, and I am thrilled to bring you Jennifer Cramer. Jennifer Cramer is a professor and the program director of the Sociology, Anthropology, General Studies programs at American Public University. Jennifer earned a BS degree from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, an MA from the New Mexico State University, and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where she's coming from tonight. So her first taste of research was by working in a fruit fly genetics lab during college, where she discovered she was best suited to larger animals and more time outside. Working in the Caribbean and in several African countries, her research started with a focus on monkey coloration and behavior. More recently, Jennifer's work in Africa has shifted to studying connections between primate and human health and partnering with local communities to focus on primate conservation. And she'll tell us a little bit more about that tonight. I first met Jennifer in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria hit, and there's an island which she may mention this evening called Cayo Santiago, where there's a population of monkeys that have been studied by primatologists for many years, but it was greatly hurt by the hurricane, was right smack dab and hit as soon as it came onto land. And so some anthropologists, including myself and Jennifer, have gone down a couple of times and tried to help rehab. And I noticed Jennifer's great with people and non-human primates, and we're excited to have her here.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's always funny to hear someone describe yourself and the things the things that you've done. They're sort of normal to you hearing other people talk about them. Thank you so much to everybody from MAPS for inviting me, and especially to Dr. Susan Kerr for her work with me in Puerto Rico and work with me to help me kind of understand what the MAPS audience is interested in, what the speaker series has brought in the past, and helping me feel welcome to this new virtual format that everybody's part of. So I've been to the first couple of talks from this fall, which were great. And I know that this one will be a bit of a change of pace. Those focused so much on health and a lot of the things that a lot of us are concerned about right now. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about primatology and what it is that I do. So I want to split the talk up. I noticed some of the other speakers have split the talks a little bit, which seemed to be a really great thing to do for questions. So the first half of the talk is going to talk a bit about what primatology is, what primatologists do, what primates are, and what makes primates really cool in terms of other wildlife. And then the second half of the talk is going to talk about my work shifting from studying primates to focusing on how we can have primates when my kids are my age and conserving them, which is really important. So a lot of us are familiar with primatologists or just primates in general. Primates are the group of mammals that includes monkeys, apes, lorises, lemurs, tarsiers, and you may have seen documentaries about them. I know when I was growing up, my family watched documentaries a lot, and I remember seeing monkeys and apes, especially in documentary series like National Geographic or Nature. So here's a very young David Attenborough on the bottom with some gorillas and Jane Goodall on top. So I know a lot of you probably have some familiarity with primatologists or wildlife through these kinds of means. And then of course, primates are very popular in pop media too. So Planet of the Apes, the Madagascar movies with the lemurs, and King Kong, of course. So primates have something special about them that captures, I think, all of our imaginations sort of in different ways. Here's a painting by Stephen Nash, who is a wildlife illustrator, an artist, and he's done a lot of great work with primatologists to help us document the different primate species that are out there and to better conserve them and understand them. So when I first started learning about primates, I became really familiar with his work, and I thought that sharing this would sort of help look at the different features that primates have. So primates range in size from being very, very tiny, from ounces, to being hundreds of pounds, like the gorilla pictured here. Primates live in different kinds of habitats, and they live in different kinds of environments in those habitats, and they have different kinds of diets. So I wanted to mention a few of the traits that make primates primates. So primates are a type of mammal. They're different than other types of mammals like carnivores or ungulates. Some of the features that make a primate is that they have stereoscopic vision, so their eyes face front and they have depth perception. They have different kinds of teeth that helps them with their typically omnivorous diet, so they're pretty good at switching between different kinds of food. They have nails instead of claws. They have opposable thumbs and grasping feet, which makes them very good at doing different things, and some of them can even use tools. They tend to be really long-lived and have a long period of infant and juvenile growth, which is important for brain development, social bonding, learning. And they also have rich social lives. A lot of primates live in matrilineal groups or other groups that have rank structures, which gives them sort of these really interesting behavioral kind of trajectories in their life, which is what I really like to study. And then they also have large brains for body size. So primates are very smart. And they live in tropical parts of the world mostly. So we don't have any here in the US that are living in the wild, which always surprises people when I'm working overseas and when I'm working with kids at schools and things. They're always like, well, we have so many primates here right in our backyard. You don't have primates where you come from. So here's a good map where that distribution in green. And as you'll see, most primates live in the bottom of North America, the south of North America, South America, Africa, a little bit in the Middle East, and then Asia. And then there's a little bit in the northern part of Africa as well, including Gibraltar. So there's some kind of popular monkeys for tourism there. So people like me that study primates are called primatologists. And as Dr. Kerr mentioned, a lot of primatologists train in anthropology. They also train in other fields like veterinary sciences or zoology, and in other fields too, but I'm one who trained as an anthropologist. And where we find careers is in a number of different places. So some of us work in universities where we primarily teach and also conduct research. Other primatologists work at national primate centers or other types of labs. The California National Primate Research Center is nearest probably to all of you. There are primatologists that work in zoos, that work in sanctuaries, that work in museums, in government roles, NGOs, and more. So there might be a number of different places that, that you've seen primatologists or that you could see a primatologist in your area. So what are the kinds of things that primatologists study? This is something we could have whole series on in itself. There's so many interesting things that primatologists study about primates. And so I thought I'd include a few examples here. As I said, my work that I really love doing is watching their behavior. And so we've learned a lot of interesting things about like mother-infant relationships from primates. We've learned a lot of things about stress hormones. And I mentioned earlier those rank relationships that they have. We've learned a lot about social isolation, transferring different groups and how stressful that can be for some primates. We've learned a lot about their relationships with humans. So some primates are known to be agricultural kinds of pests where they get into fields, take things from farmers. They sometimes are used in the tourism industry for like where I've seen it most kind of popular is on kind of cruise ship destinations where they have monkeys that people can pose and take a picture with. And also for the pet trade. So there's some interesting kinds of connections between people and primates that some primatologists study. There's also some other things that, that primatologists study in terms of primate and human health. So we know that there can be virus transmission between primates and humans. We can learn a lot about human microbiome and gut health and hormones by also studying primates because they're our closest biological relative. And we can also learn a lot about the kind of general habitat and ecosystems that we all live in. Primates play a really important role in the food chain and the larger ecosystem, especially in things like dispersing seeds and contributing to the environment. So when I was in college, I was a biology major and I did not know what I wanted to do after college. And as Dr. Kerr mentioned, I started out by working in a fruit fly genetics lab. It was a really great job. I worked in that job for all 4 years of college, but I realized I did not want to sit and stare at fruit flies under a microscope all day. There are people that can do that, and those people are great. That was not something that was going to be a forever kind of thing for me to do. So I took a class that was about primates. It was an elective for biology majors, and I really kind of fell in love with learning more about them. I got books on them. I started watching all the documentaries that I hadn't seen before. I started showing up at my professor's office hours to ask her all about how she'd become a primatologist. And I read about this interesting primate, which is a wakari. And when I saw this monkey, I thought, that is the most bizarre looking animal I've ever seen. It looks so different than even a lot of the other monkeys. I was really struck by the color of its face. And in one of the articles that I read about them, it mentioned just very briefly that their facial color is related to their health. And I found that really interesting and started trying to kind of track down where the original information had come from, like who had studied this and what did they find about health. And what I found was there really wasn't anything that was linked to. It was kind of an anecdotal piece of information that people kind of passed around, but it didn't have a lot of like basis to it. So I decided I wanted to try to study wakaris someday in my life. And I decided since there wasn't a whole lot known about color in wakaris, maybe I could start looking at primate color in other species. So primates have some different, very colorful species. Some aren't so colorful, but some are. So you might be familiar with this guy at the top, a mandrill, or this one in the middle, which is a gelada baboon. They have these really cool bright chest patches. And then there's this species on the bottom, which is a vervet monkey or a savanna monkey. And they have these bright colors on their genital region. So I started studying what I could about what we did know about primate color, hoping that one day I could go and study wakaris. And that led me to getting to my master's project, which was on primate color with rhesus macaques, another species that has sort of bright red coloring, especially during the mating season. And this is when I went to Puerto Rico, which is where Dr. Kerr and I worked together to do some post kind of disaster cleanup. So this is Cayo Santiago down on the left, and it's a small island. It's been studied for about 80 years. I think it's the longest running mammal field site that has had data collected at it in the whole world. The monkeys were brought there in the 1930s, and they've been under study ever since. So we have a lot of really great information about their behavior, about their genetics. And at this place, I got to work there for 2 summers, and I studied primate color. This is one of my study females. And normally her face, when she's not in estrus during the mating season, is just kind of a regular pinkish color, like around her snout is here. But she got this very dramatic sort of red and bluish kind of eyeshadowing, as a lot of the females did during the mating season. So I was really interested in studying that and sort of trying to figure out if it had to do with male choice and things like that. So that was my first sort of stab at understanding primate color. I went on from there and studied savanna monkeys in South Africa. I was there for about 5 months, and I also studied color, but this time I studied male color, and I was interested in if females choose males based on their color, or if there's other sorts of characteristics that that are associated with male color, like health or rank or things like that. So here's 2 males showing off their color, and here's me watching the group for the day. And so that was my sort of next step in studying my question. I really wanted to know more about primate color in general and hopefully get to study wakaris someday. But while I was doing all of this research and collecting measurements of monkeys and collecting behavioral information about monkeys and collecting data about their color, the thing that really kept coming up for me was that I got to work in communities where primates and people had situations sometimes where the people didn't really understand things about the primates, in the sense that they would be frustrated with them about crop raiding or about coming into houses or having other kinds of conflicts that come up. And so I started to notice that there was an opportunity really to find out more from working with local people closely about if there were ways that primatologists could do their research, but alongside the community needs. So if people needed education programs, if people needed help devising kind of strategies for planting or for environmental work that maybe fit better with the wildlife and sort of help them too. And that sort of led me to start looking into finding ways that my projects could move away from research in the traditional kind of sense of just answering my research questions to further our understanding in the body of literature, and to start moving in the direction of understanding primate and human issues and conflicts, and helping conserve primates, because primates across the world are facing extinction and declining populations. And so this really seemed like a good opportunity to work with those communities to find out what they need and to help them better. And so that brings me to the end of the research kind of part of my work, of what got me started in moving into primate conservation. And I will answer some questions before I move into the second part that's more conservation focused.
So Jennifer, I see a question, says, where are the wakari monkeys located?
They are in the Amazon. Yep. So they're I think they range a bit into Brazil and also Peru. Yes. So when I did contact someone who was studying wakaris early on when I was interested in studying them, and they're extremely difficult to sort of track down and work with and study. Just last year, I was talking to a colleague who went and worked in the Amazon, and she was there for about 18 months. And she said in 18 months, she only saw them, I think it was 13 times, which is very infrequent to encounter them. So on the one hand, I'm glad I didn't go there to try to study them. I think it would have been really hard, especially to get close enough to study their color. But on the other hand, I'm still waiting to get there. So.
Well, I hope you do. Okay, it's the second question. Did you ever figure out whether the female monkeys preferred a certain color in males?
Yes, that's a good question. So there's there's evidence that they do, and there's evidence that they don't. It depends a little bit on who you talk to. So what I found was that males, when I was studying these males with this blue color, they have these really great red, white, and blue displays. Let me see if I can go back. Yeah, so it's that opening picture maybe. Yeah, this guy right here. So they often sort of stomp around and then like show their colors. In females, actually, for the males that had the darker blue colors, the brighter blue colors, they were more interested in them and mated with them more often than the other males. The other thing I learned was I studied color in this species, these savanna monkeys, throughout Africa. So this species is found from east to west and from north to south. What I found was the infant and juvenile males all start out with this blue coloration, and it's sort of a dull blue. But as they get older, some of them become very bright blue, some of them become just sort of a regular blue, some of them become very light, almost white in color. And so we started to sort of get interested in that development of color, like what makes a male get more blue than the other males. And that's something that nobody's really answered very well yet, but we started to get some information about female preference to giving matings to these brighter blue males. Yeah.
There's sort of a related question, which colors tell you if the monkeys are healthy or sick? I think you kind of mentioned that a little bit, but if there's anything else you want to clarify about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've found, and when I say we, I mean the people that are studying color, and there's, I don't want to say a handful, maybe like a heaping handful or two handfuls of people that are really, really interested in primate color and have been studying it for a while now. The health stuff seems really most related to red. So the species that have red colors, so the mandrill has some red color on them, the gelada baboons, I'm assuming the wakaris if someone studied them. That red is really sensitive to changes in blood flow in your body. So it's very sensitive to hormones, and it's also really sensitive to your immune response. So there have been some findings in terms of health in red that are really interesting. And the same in human skin color, actually, too. Like human skin, also people can pick up on subtle changes and if people are sick and things like that, just based on their skin.
Interesting. Someone asked, what's your favorite monkey to learn about?
That's a good question. You know, the one I would say is my favorite. So I really want to see a wakari someday, and hopefully that'll happen. But I really love these guys up here, the mandrills. Their color is so fascinating. They live in Gabon. There's a study colony there that's been under study for a few decades now. They have really interesting hierarchies, and males kind of come and go from being very colorful and high ranked to not being colorful and not being high ranked. And that can happen super rapidly. Or I shouldn't say super rapidly, but over a period of weeks or months. Those guys are the ones that I really, really like reading more about. And because there's this well-established colony in Gabon, there's been a lot of great literature to come out about them.
Okay, there's one more color question. Does a certain color of monkey affect its personality and interactions towards other individuals or animals?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Yes, so they definitely interact with each other differently based on color. And actually, there was a primatologist who was working at UCLA as part of her doctoral work, and she did these really interesting experiments with savanna monkeys that were captive at UCLA in a colony that was at that university. And she actually spray painted them so they were different colors than their own color, and then watched how they interacted. And so there's sort of this interesting body of literature about when we experimentally change their colors, how they react. There were more fights with males that had similar color than were dissimilar in color. So that was one thing. And the other thing is that there seemed to be some evidence that males know when another male's cheating and his color wasn't his real color. When she changed it. So that was a really cool set of experiments that I think has been memorable for a lot of people in studying primate color.
Well, just as a quick aside, if you want to go see the mandrills, they are at the San Francisco Zoo when it's open. There's a question, I'm not sure if you want to take it now or a little later, but it's about the conflicts. Would you like to talk more about that first and then come back to it, or?
Sure. Do you want to give me the question? Because then I'll have it in mind when I'm explaining on slides.
Yeah, what were the major conflicts? Was it along the line of hunting the primates or pushing them out of their environments? So those two things.
Yes, that's a good question. Both.
Okay.
And other things. Yes, so I'll be sure to touch on that.
Work on that. We have a couple other questions, just a little bit more generally. How many types of primates have you personally encountered? Have you counted?
I should count, shouldn't I? I would say maybe in like wild ones, I would say maybe 10 different primates. I don't know. I'll actually, that's going to bother me now. I'm going to have to like sit down and check it out, like bullet list them, but probably about 10, I would say.
Okay, there's a health question. What's the range of body temperature and blood pressure of these animals?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. It's funny that you ask because when I did some of this work, I was part of a project actually also, although with a different group, that was headed by UCLA and UW Milwaukee, where I did my dissertation. And that work was to trap and release about 2,500 of these savanna monkeys. And we did that between 2009 and 2011. We trapped these monkeys in the Caribbean. We trapped them in Africa. And all of the work that we did for that was for a National Institutes of Health project that was working on the genome of this monkey. So this monkey right here, the savanna monkey, you can look them up if you're interested. Their genus name is Chlorocebus, Chlorocebus. So they're used in a lot of biomedical research. And their genome is important to us for understanding human diseases and other human things like human behaviors, human anxiety behaviors, lots of other kinds of things too, obesity, diabetes. And as part of that trapping project, we would trap these monkeys. We would give them full physical exams. So we would measure their bodies. We would collect tissue samples and blood samples. We would collect photographs of their pelage coloring and their genital coloring for me and some other things like that. But we did not take body temperatures. I feel like we might have taken a few body temperatures, but I did not take body temperatures. So I'm not sure how close it is or isn't to humans. It's a good question. And blood pressure, I've never personally taken a monkey's blood pressure, so I can't speak to that very well.
All right, so there's kind of tailing in on one of the things you just mentioned. This is based on your observations of primates. What would you say may be your strongest epiphany about human behavior and its connection to the primal?
That's a good question. So I am a mom, and my daughters are 5 and 8. And I will say that when I have studied primate behavior, both before I was a mom and since I've been a mom, I'm really struck with how careful and attentive and gentle most monkey and ape moms are with their babies. I've certainly seen some crabby moms, some crabby primate moms, some grumpy primate moms, maybe even some neglectful ones. But for the most part, I've seen them be very attentive and gentle, and they have these sort of times where they're nursing their babies and they're sort of watching them play, or they go get involved in squabbles, or they share their food, or things like that, that I was really struck by before I became a mom. But then when I became a mom, I realized how common that seems to be for all primate moms that have these long investments and these really needy offspring that need a mom that's really attentive to them. So that's something that I've been really interested in watching, and kind of my own evolution as a person has fit along with that.
All right, something that's a little bit more related to what you will talk about, but still, I think, answerable now. Did you need the support of whoever was funding your research to do the community gap bridging that you wanted to do?
I guess I'd ask, do you mean like the support of whoever was funding the research, like we have to have permission from who's funding the research, or?
I would interpret it maybe more as like you got funding to go do this pure color research. Now you're shifting your plans. Was that okay?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I mean, they can clarify in the chat if I got that wrong, but.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, the color project was completed, and the genetics folks and all those other people that were on that team, their work was also completed. So sort of for me, this was like a really a huge career opportunity and once in a lifetime thing to get to visit multiple countries, see primates and people in these multiple countries. And then when that project wrapped up and I finished my part of the project, but also my degree that I was getting as part of that project, I then had all these great experiences to decide what would I like to do next with my career. And what I decided to do next was to work with human primate interface, I guess, as we'd call it, both in terms of health issues. Like one of the things that I work on now is parasites and gut microbiome between humans and primates and the things that we share. And then I also work on these kind of conservation and education projects. And so I've been applying for funding and getting those projects funded separately in little small kind of snippets. So each of those gets, has a plan for that year. We get that project done, then we apply for funding for the next year. Yeah, so hopefully that answers that question.
That does. And Jill says that was the right interpretation. So we got it.
Okay.
Yay. Another just sort of basic primate question. How are the primates related to flying lemurs?
That's a good question. I don't know a lot about flying lemurs, so I would have to look, but lemurs in Madagascar are primates. Are flying lemurs different than, I feel like that refers to a different type of animal.
They're colugos, if you know them by that name.
I'm going to have to look.
I know that they look like they jump through the trees, and I think that's why they called them flying lemurs, but. Yeah,
I was going to say, I feel like that doesn't refer to, they're not related to lemurs, like a ring-tailed lemur or the other guys that you would see in like a Madagascar kind of movie. But I don't know why they necessarily have that name. There are lemurs that can leap very far between trees. And so I don't know if maybe there's some kind of like local kind of name in that way, because maybe they move similarly to primates, or that sort of the distance that they have or something like that. But it'd be interesting to ask. I certainly have a number of close colleagues who work in Madagascar who might know that answer.
Okay. I think maybe two quick questions. One is, how long did you spend researching color in primates?
Oh, that phase of my life was probably about 7 or 8 years, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. And then one last color question. Is the red color change in fur, vasodilation of skin, or pigment?
It is vasodilation of skin. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, we'll let you continue on, and I'll keep collecting questions as we go.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So Primates are at risk, as you might know from watching documentaries or following the news about animals and wildlife and climate change and habitat destruction and all these interrelated things. About 3 years ago, this really great comprehensive article came out. Actually, one of my professors when I was in college is one of the authors on this paper, which is pretty cool. So I've been learning from him for a really long time. This great map is in the article, and I wanted to share it because it points out where primates are sort of where we see the most primate richness, which refers to how many primates are in a single habitat. So, you know, you might go to a place where there's only one primate or two primates that live in that particular area, but there are places that have as many as 26 different primate species living in the exact same environment and habitat. So those places have a lot of biodiversity. And you'll see that there's some here and here. The other thing that's important to note about this map is that most of the primates in the world are declining. So their populations are getting smaller, and in some cases, their species are actually classified as being threatened. So globally, we know 75% of the primate species, and there's about 500 primate species that are recognized right now, are on the decline. And about 55%, so a little over half of them, are actually threatened. They're vulnerable, they're threatened, they are endangered or possibly going to be extinct within our lifetimes, which is really, really important. Another thing to notice is that this is especially the case if you break it down by region. Madagascar is especially at risk, and we know that the lemurs need a lot more conservation education and attention and funding to be able to help those populations, because we are probably going to lose some of those species in our lifetimes. And then the same in Asia. Some of the other areas aren't as much at risk, like in Africa, but we certainly want to keep that in mind in terms of it being an issue globally. So why are primates at risk? And this gets into that question that somebody asked about things like hunting. So often I think, you know, when I was growing up and we learned about issues with animals just in general, sort of what makes an animal go extinct or why do animals become endangered, the things I always learned about were their habitats being destroyed. And those kinds of things certainly do happen. Logging, people that are keeping animals, so like cattle ranching, other things that destroy the environment like urbanization, mining, things like that. Those things are important to recognize as being some of the problems that cause primates being lost. But there's a lot of really important underlying causes, which is one of the things that this paper really highlights. So thinking about things like poverty, thinking about things like population growth and how those things contribute to our changing the environment, then those things lead to what we see the primates experiencing or other at-risk wildlife. So they're losing their habitat, they're having disruption of their populations. For some primate species, for example, that are living in really fragmented environments, it can be very hard for an individual to leave their group and get to a new group, which some of them have to do when they become adults. So even if it seems like maybe there's monkeys around and they're doing okay, if they can't get to where they need to go, or maybe if their kind of patchy fragment that they have doesn't have enough food to support the whole group, those kinds of things cause problems as well. We also see that there can be issues with population decline overall. So some of the endangered species only have like a few hundred individuals or even less. And that declining population sometimes kind of it's almost kind of run away. It can't necessarily be easily stopped by just telling people to not hurt the habitat in that area or something like that. Sometimes it takes more serious interventions to be able to protect that population so it can get its numbers back up. Then there's also some issues with disease transmission. And this is really important, especially right now, because we know that humans and primates, because we are so similar biologically, can share and pass diseases between us. So we have zoonotic transmission opportunities. When Dr. Kerr was talking about she and I working in Puerto Rico, primate researchers that go there have to actually to learn about and get an education program and sign some papers and things about a specific herpes variant, herpes B, that those monkeys have that people can catch, and it can hurt people, though it doesn't really hurt the monkeys, and vice versa. So we have to get tuberculosis tests before we go, because tuberculosis in us is reasonably manageable, but it is not manageable in monkey populations and can kill monkeys. So disease transmission between humans and primates can put a lot of already at-risk primate populations at further risk if there's humans around that could potentially give them diseases. A number of years ago, there was an outbreak of rhinovirus, which causes a lot of human common colds in a population of chimpanzees, and it had devastating effects on that population. They lost a lot of chimpanzees in just a few years, just based on this very simple virus that most humans can get over, but it jumped over into the apes in that particular site. So primatologists right now, too, are also very worried about the possibility of, if we start doing field work, if we've paused during the pandemic, for those of us that do field work with wild species, would we be putting them at risk if we go back and start studying them during the pandemic, and we could potentially pass COVID-19 on to these primates? So here's some mitigating approaches. I'll talk about these a little bit more in a few minutes when I talk about one of my current projects that I'm working on. But the great thing too about this article is that it spells out some really specific ways that we can help. And some of those ways are about growing local populations, local people in terms of their kind of capacity. So capacity building with local stakeholders, helping improve their health, improve their livelihoods, helping protect their forest, creating community forests that work for them, doing sustainable land use, creating more protected areas, things like that. So what are primatologists doing to help? So some primatologists, we go to the field and we help by doing our work, supporting local economies, and helping people study their primates and understand why they're important. Some primatologists help by going to communities and helping do some of those mitigating factors that I just mentioned. So things like providing alternative sources of livelihood. If they find that people there are hunting the primates for money, they can help replace that hunting money by helping them maybe set up beekeeping is a popular one, or some other kinds of locally appropriate things. Primatologists also do things like have scientific meetings where we get to meet and talk about these kinds of things and help each other understand, hey, what's working for you at your site in the Amazon, and what's working for me and my site in sub-Saharan Africa. What kinds of things have you run into in terms of working with the local community that might be helpful for me to know about? What kinds of things are going on with your species that I could support you with? So us going to conferences has been pretty important. This is actually a picture from a conference we had in 2018 in Nairobi at the UN, and it was really great. It's a conference that happens every 2 years, and it brings together maybe about 1,000 primatologists or so, I think, give or take, from all different countries to discuss those kinds of things. One of the things we also do at that meeting is we decide on the IUCN's list for the top 25 most endangered primates for the upcoming 2 years. So we gather in a room, we go through all the evidence, we decide on what primates are going to be listed, and then that helps us kind of rally around and apply for grants and things to get those species the support that they need over those next upcoming years. So my own priorities then shifted. So I mentioned this a little bit when I answered one of the questions during our question break. When I sort of finished up my color research and was thinking about what would I like to do now with my career once I finished my doctoral degree and I finished that research question, as much as I'd like to keep studying color, and I probably will continue in some capacity, I had seen such a need and interest in local communities for working with people that had my skill set and expertise as a partner to help them address issues that were going on there, that I thought that that was a great way to continue my work. So one of the countries that I did the color work in was this tiny little country called the Gambia. And it's this little green squiggle along the Gambia River. And this larger boundary right here is Senegal. So it's a small country that's inside another country. And I'd been there on my color work, and I really, really loved working there. And I saw an opportunity because there aren't a lot of people that have been working there or were working there at the time. And so I started talking with our local partners there, especially at the Department of Parks and Wildlife Management, to see what opportunities there were for me to continue working there and partner with them. So here I am with my research partner, Mauro Giallo, who is the head of research at the Department of Parks and Wildlife Management. And one of the things that we talked about was starting to try to kind of inventory local perceptions about primates. So in his work throughout the country, he hears different stories about primates, from they're raiding my crops to they're stealing things in my house to, oh, I kind of like them, to I've heard stories that they can make you sick, to all kinds of different local knowledge. So for the last 3 years, we've been working together to study the primates for part of the day, where we collect behavioral information and collect fecal samples for our parasite work and things like that. Then the other half of the day, we're going into communities and asking them questions about what they know about the primates, and what changes they've seen to the primate populations across their lifespan as the country has become more urbanized and more logged. So here's the 5 primate species that are in the Gambia right now. There is this little guy who's a sweet little bush baby. They come out at night. You can hear them. They're very cute. There's these big guys. They're Guinea baboons. They're I don't want to say they're horrible. There's a lot of great people that study baboons, but baboons are really aggressive and grumpy, and I always get a little nervous when I'm around them because they're usually in really big groups too. So they're big, they're fighting all the time, they're very loud, and they're in big groups. So I always feel a little intimidated around them. There's these guys, the savanna monkeys that I described earlier, with those beautiful colors on their backside. These guys down here, which are red colobus monkeys, and I'll talk just a little bit more about them in a few minutes. These guys are endangered. And then there's this guy, a Apatys monkey, and these are the fastest primates, so they're really cool to watch. There's also chimpanzees in the Gambia. These chimpanzees live on islands that are inside a protected national park, and they were reintroduced there in the late 60s, early 70s by Eddie Brewer. And it's now managed by someone, Janice Carter. And those chimpanzees are there because chimpanzees went extinct locally in the Gambia in, I think, the 50s. So they worked very hard to get chimpanzees reintroduced. And they now live on these islands that they can't get off of, but people can kind of visit them and sort of understand a little bit more about the wildlife history of the Gambia and why it's important to actually make sure that we're trying to prevent these kinds of local extinctions. Some of the risks to primates in the Gambia include logging. So every day when I'm working, I see many trucks like this driving by with trees that are just enormously huge and took forever to grow. And it really is heartbreaking to see. There's a lot of industry there for instance, mahogany that gets shipped out and overseas for furniture purchases and furniture and that kind of industry, I guess. There's also some hunting of primates and other wildlife. Not a whole lot, I would say, as much as in some of the other West African countries, but it certainly does happen. And then their furs get sold for kind of local medicine and some other things. And sometimes they're also eaten for meat. And then the other big one is that logging is also happening for charcoal production, which is used a lot for local cooking. So if we look back at this chart, hunting is a big cause of declining populations of primates in the Gambia. A little bit of hunting, large-scale agriculture, certainly, as there's been more kind of cattle farming and cashew farms and things like that being set up. So some of the things that we are working on, a group of colleagues and I are working on, is to set up a new protected area in one part of the country. We're trying to support community forests. We're also trying to work very hard to alleviate poverty by helping people with some alternative food sources. So one of the things that a colleague who's running a brand new site that he set up there is doing is providing seed banks to people to help them plant seeds for long-term cash crops that they'll be able to sell so they can rely less on the natural forests that the primates are using. And then we're also working very hard to engage local support. So we have a local teacher that's working with students to do an education program related to primates. One of the colleagues has written a book about primates in the Gambia, especially that endangered species, the red colobus, and those have now been sent out to schools there and are being used in education program. And we've trained a local field staff team on how to collect basic research information about the primates, GPS coordinates, diet, behavior, and those kinds of things. So that way we can monitor those populations alongside us doing these sort of community growth pieces to sort of see if that's going to be helpful to those populations of monkeys. So some other local efforts that are being led actually by Department of Parks and Wildlife Management and the Forestry Department are helping people set up beekeeping to replace incomes and help with poverty. And also these wonderful little tree nurseries that you'll find at different park headquarters where they're trying to start tree nurseries and give them to families or replant the forests themselves inside the national park boundaries. I'm really, really proud of the fact that last year we had a stakeholder meeting that is the first kind of conference of its kind. We had people Skype in from the US, the UK, and Portugal to give talks about research related to this endangered red colobus species. And then we had local stakeholders from the Parks and Wildlife Department, from forestry, from NGOs, and students from the University of the Gambia come together. We rolled out the map, we got out papers, we decided on some priorities that we're going to work on for the next few years, which I think was really well appreciated by everybody and a really important collaborative step in building community. And then lastly, I wanted to mention the name of this project I was referring to. So my colleague at the University of Cumbria in the UK right here, his name is Dr. Mick Mayhew. He's really been the force behind and the creator of this Communities for Red Colobus project to conserve this endangered species in the Gambia before it goes extinct. And he's built this field team and trained them, and they're the ones that are running these education programs, tree nurseries, and primate research every day, which is amazing. We just had a great meeting last week with our steering committee. And that brings me to my last slide. So I wanted to say thank you again to the MAPS team, to Dr. Susan Kerr for inviting me, and of course, all my fieldwork colleagues and my partner teams and communities that I'm definitely missing a lot during the pandemic, but I'm really, really happy that they're doing well and safe, and that the projects have been able to continue despite the pandemic.
Thanks to you, Jennifer. It's been great. I really enjoyed it. We do have a few more questions if you have a little bit of breath left.
Yes.
Okay. All right, a question, what about other monkeys, such as the long-tailed macaque from Asia? I saw a YouTube video of how there were too many macaques in Thailand and that people were making, doing sterilizations.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know a whole lot about what's going on with those macaques in particular, but I've also seen some of those videos of these enormous populations, and I know that it's really frustrating for local people. I don't know about the sterilizations there per se, but I do know there's been kind of similar things that have happened with large baboon populations in South Africa, especially around Cape Town. There's even been hired groups of people that are that kill baboons or trap them and then kill them because they are destroying forests that are planted specifically for the forest industry. So it's a really hard thing. You know, one thing I remember from a conference a handful of years ago, there were a bunch of people at this conference, and we were all in a session about primate conservation efforts. And there was a group of loud voices saying, you know, we have to make these people conserve their primates. And that seems to be sort of the general idea, you know, behind a lot of these things. And someone brought up this really eloquent point, and hard to say, I guess, in some ways. that is, what right do we have to go to other countries and say, here's what you need to do with your wildlife? And so it's a really delicate thing to balance sort of what those local needs are and what their local ways of dealing with things are, and helping try to educate them, provide additional information about why they're important on a global scale, and why they're important to us, and why they should also be important to them in maintaining their own environments and things, and how to sort of do that in a safe and healthy way for everybody. So I'm not sure exactly what is going on with those populations there, but I'm sure that the primatologists that have been working there have been having those kinds of conversations too.
Yeah. There's a couple other questions. One fairly general. Why do we not see significant numbers of primates in, for example, North America or Europe?
Yeah, that's a good question. So back a long time ago, there were primate-like creatures in places like North America and Europe. And more recently through time, the living ones now are in these tropical areas. I think those climates suit them best. Although that said, the Japanese macaques that live in Japan seem to do really well in snowy environments, and hot springs and things like that. So I'm not sure why primates have not necessarily kind of moved back into some of these areas, maybe, but the more kind of tropical habitat seems to suit them a lot better. I will say, though, that when they've been reintroduced, or not reintroduced, but introduced into places that they shouldn't naturally be, they've sometimes taken off quite well. So, for example, there's a population in Florida that is wild that you can read about if you want to. There's been efforts to sort of trap them or do something with them to kind of, I don't know, to take them out from being sort of wild as they've gotten to be in Florida. There's also these ones that I mentioned, the savanna monkeys that I studied in the Caribbean. They're not supposed to be in the Caribbean. They were brought to the Caribbean during the slave trade from West Africa. And since they've gotten there, there's actually thousands and thousands of monkeys now on Barbados and St. Kitts and Nevis. That normally wouldn't be there, but just in those few hundred years, the populations have gotten enormous because they're wonderful tropical environments that didn't have other primates taking up that kind of ecological niche.
Okay. We have a disease question. Would certain diseases where humans can be affected greatly and cause harm or death affect the monkeys as much as they do with humans? So examples being COVID-19, SARS, cancer, or other infectious diseases.
That's a good question. So from the folks I know that have been working on the kind of ape research that are worried about COVID-19 jumping into ape populations, there is a lot of concern that that would be a big risk, that it might be even more serious in them than it is in us. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I think there was a SARS outbreak, one of the SARS, something named SARS, in an ape population a number of years ago. I'm trying to think. I was just reading about that the other day. But I don't know kind of what the death rate was, or sort of what that outcome was of that one. I'd have to look that paper back up. Primates do get cancers, just like humans do. I don't know that their sort of complication or death rate is the same as ours, but that is something that can happen. There's another one that just came to mind that I was going to bring up. Another one is also SIV and HIV. So primates have been used to study and better understand HIV in humans because primates have a version of that virus as well. It's called SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus. And they do not get as sick, or even sometimes mostly really sick at all, as humans do from HIV. So primatologists, veterinarians, other experts have, epidemiologists, disease experts have been studying SIV in primates to help better understand why it doesn't make primates sick, but HIV in humans makes humans sick. So that's another good example.
Okay. Another question. Is it possible to freeze female eggs and inseminate and do insemination to help with the population increase?
Wow, that's a really good question. A a lot of research about women's health in general has sometimes stemmed from primate models, where primates in labs have been used to help us understand things like, for example, some of the contraception options that women have and things like that have been studied and tested in primates first. I'm guessing, although I'm not an expert on egg freezing and all those things, I'm guessing that some of that early work probably was at least tested in primates first. I don't know that anyone has necessarily thought to use that as a strategy for conservation. I'd have to look into it more, but it's certainly an interesting one. It makes me think of kind of a Jurassic Park situation, where you've got something stored just in case, that kind of a thing. It's an interesting thing to think about. Yeah.
All right, and we have a last question about the chimpanzees. Why did the chimpanzees almost go extinct in the Gambia and not in the other species?
That's a good question. I'm guessing chimpanzees are a lot bigger, and often when humans are hunting out a species, they hunt out the big ones first. So I'm guessing that that's probably what happened. The other thing is, some of the monkeys that are there, they've probably always been there, but they sometimes are much higher in the trees and things like that than maybe some of the chimpanzees were. Chimpanzees might have been getting around human settlements a little bit more. It's tough for me to answer without being a chimpanzee expert. I'd have to ask one of my chimpanzee expert colleagues, but I'm assuming it's probably because they're big. And they might have also had some small population sizes. There's still chimpanzees in Senegal, which is around the Gambia and is much bigger than the Gambia. There's definitely still wild chimpanzees in Senegal. So the populations in the Gambia may have already been small, and it may have been easier for them to go extinct locally.
All right, well, I just want to also share that I see lots of thank yous for sharing your passion and other things being posted in the chat if you're not seeing those. And that was our last question that we had. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I've really appreciated spending the time with you, having our Science Friday night. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it.